Well, let's bring into the conversation Tom Fletcher, who is the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. He joins us from Geneva. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Just in terms of what we've been discussing in the programme up until now, I mean, we've been focused on events in Iran, and there's a real danger, isn't there, that people in Gaza are going to be forgotten or at least eclipsed for the time being. Do you see that as being a real risk?
Well, there are multiple dangers here. I mean, there's the danger of escalation and what that would mean to tens of millions of people across the region who are already in such dire need. It's why we're saying to the parties, step back from the brink. You know, we need cool heads. We need diplomacy to prevail there. But you're right, there is also this danger that we lose the attention that we need on the levels of starvation, in particular in Gaza itself. And this massive effort that we need to have underway to help us deliver at scale and save lives in the numbers that we need to save lives.
You were in Gaza, I gather, earlier on this year. I mean, just paint the picture for us from when you were there. I mean, clearly things have changed, you know, for the worse since then. But I mean, first of all, had you ever seen anything like it?
I haven't. No, I got in, it was about halfway through the 42-day ceasefire. And at the time we were delivering 600, 700 trucks of aid a day. We've managed about that number since the 19th of May, which shows you the restrictions that we're facing right now. And I drove in through the north. I'd been in Nir Oz kibbutz, which was one of those kibbutzim that was hit hard on October the 7th. 1 in 4 people there was killed. Very, very moving visit. But then you enter Gaza itself, and for miles and miles, all you see is just desolation, massive destruction. You can't see what was a mosque, what was a school, what was a hospital, what was a home. You see dogs pulling corpses from the rubble. And you see people who are just clinging on hour by hour, day to day, but determined to survive.
I mean, there are accusations and labels that are being bandied around, labels like genocide and war crimes, things that Israel denies. Clearly, though, people are starving. Food is in extremely short supply, fuel, clean water as well. I mean, what do you think is the best way to describe the situation? Do you think genocide is an apt label?
So I'm not a lawyer, and so that's not the label I would use. I'd leave that to the courts who are working on those questions right now. What I'm interested in is getting that aid in and preventing further starvation in Gaza. You know, we have enormous amounts of aid already cleared, provided by the international community. We can feed all of the civilians in Gaza for months if we're allowed to deliver it. And without that, we will have a continuation of this humanitarian catastrophe, horrific humanitarian crisis that we're seeing around us every day in Gaza.
Yeah, and for several days we've been reporting on people queuing up for food at these aid distribution points and being shot at and in some cases killed. I mean, who do you blame for that sort of horror story?
So I'm not in the blame game. We're in the aid delivery game. We regularly call on the Security Council and others to hold to account those responsible for acting with impunity against civilians. And we've regularly condemned Hamas for its hostage-taking and Israel for the levels of civilian killing in Gaza. What we need now, and our real focus, is that we have a plan. We know how to do this. We know how to deliver aid at massive, massive scale. And what makes me furious is that we're not allowed to do that we're being prevented from doing that in the way that we know how to do this. This is our bread and butter. We do this in so many places across the world, and we could save lives at massive scale right now, and we're not being allowed to do that.
Why is it that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is doing such a chaotic job, and you know, in some cases a deadly job of distributing aid?
So I don't know, I can't comment really on their day-to-day, the modalities, the mechanisms through which they're using these militarized hubs to deliver aid. We've set out in detail, in public and private, our reservations about the way this is done. We think aid should always be delivered in a principled, neutral, impartial way. We worry about the way that these mechanized hubs displace people and, as we've seen on our screens, dehumanize people. People should never be met with bullets when they're just seeking to feed their kids.
You've been there, as we were saying earlier on, and you're quoted as saying, it's that smell and sound of death on this scale and the trauma on this scale, you do carry that with you. Just tell us, if you will, Tom, how this experience of visiting Gaza and following the situation in Gaza has affected you personally.
I think it affects everyone who's involved with this crisis. I think a lot about our humanitarians on the ground who are all deeply traumatized by what they're experiencing every day. And of course, it affects all of us who are dealing with this at the headquarter level as well. But what we go through in just a few hours, a few days visiting somewhere like Gaza is nothing compared to life for those civilians there who see no way out and who are dealing with this horrendous situation day in, day out. And they want what we all want. They want to get food to their kids. They want their kids to be in school. They want medical care for their relatives. And all those things are being denied because of this horrific conflict happening around them. And they are suffering unimaginably. And ultimately, they must be the focus of all of our attention.
But when you were talking to us earlier on, telling us about the sight of dogs eating deceased human beings, I mean, that's horrific, even as an image to conjure up in one's mind. I mean, is there an anecdote or an encounter that stands out amongst the probably very many as being perhaps the most haunting? And if so, what is it?
So many haunting memories from conversations, because I overnighted there. I spent a lot of time talking to civilians about their experiences. It's so shocking when you meet someone who has walked 4 days to try to get water for their family. And the old man, just held up this small jerry can of water and just said, "This is all I have right now. I've lost everything." I met the grandmother whose son had bled out on the street in front of her, and medics who'd come to help him had been taken out by snipers as she sat there watching him lying there in the street in his own blood. I visited Al-Auda Hospital, one of the few hospitals still basically functioning. And on the wall, a doctor who was later killed has written, "Tell them we did what we could." And in a way, that's been our motto, certainly my motto since leaving Gaza, that I want to know that every day we are doing all we can for those civilians. This may be beyond imagination, the situation, the crisis that they're facing, but we cannot let it be beyond our levels of compassion. We have got to keep finding ways, keep finding the arguments, keep working and working and working to get the aid through that we know that can save so many lives.
And that's a huge challenge for you and for all of those who work with you, because the UN is massively stretched. You're supporting upwards of 110, possibly more, million people around the world. There isn't enough money, is there?
Well, there's plenty of money out there. All I'm asking for is 1% of what the world spends on defense every year to save over 100 million lives. I can't believe that there isn't that money for that. I can't believe that the world has lost that level of kindness and generosity for those in direst need. Over 300 million people need help right now. And we've gone through this brutal life and death set of choices, horrific choices we've had to make to prioritize just over 114 million of those for urgent life-saving support. So there is money out there, but the governments of the world, the nations of this world, are choosing to spend it on arms rather than saving lives.
Yeah, you're quoted as saying, the mathematics is cruel, the consequences are heartbreaking. So I'm assuming you've had to make some extremely agonizing choices as to where you're going to spend money and where you're going to have to cut back. In terms of the hole in the budget and the shortfall, what are we talking?
Well, we appealed for $47 billion to reach 307 million people globally. Now, we don't know what we'll get for sure, but last year our appeals were under half funded. And I imagine that this year, particularly with the US cuts, but with cuts elsewhere, that we'll get even less. We will save as many lives as we can with the money that we're given, and we will bring in the efficiencies, the prioritizations to do that. But ultimately, you're right. we are having to sit here and decide which lives to save and which lives not to save. And the frustration is that we know how to save lives at much, much greater scale. We've got the plans, we've got the people, we've got the coalitions, we've got the networks among local communities who can do this. But the world is not giving us the resources to respond.
And as you say, millions of people, hundreds of millions of people around the world dependent on that aid in some 70 countries, I gather. Perhaps it's more than that. Where would you say this shortfall of funding and the corresponding cutback in aid is going to be felt most acutely?
Everywhere. Everywhere. It will be felt by parents who see their kids die in front of them. It will be felt, as I saw in Afghanistan a few weeks ago, by mothers who lose their children because they have to cycle 3 hours to the nearest hospital because the local clinic has shut down. It will be felt by victims of sexual violence who won't get the support they need in places like Sudan, where sexual violence has been weaponized to such an extent. It will be felt massively in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which I'm visiting next week, where our appeals are only 11% funded. So the human impact is massive. And ultimately, that leaves a mark on all of us because, I'll make the ethical case, the moral case for helping people around the world. But there's also a self-interested case that we should be making to populations and governments who should be funding this work, that the result of leaving so many people in such dire need will be more pandemics, more insecurity, more inequality, more migration. You can't build a wall or put a tariff on these global challenges. You've got to get out there and meet them at source. And we are storing up problems for ourselves because of our lack of kindness.
You're clearly swimming against the tide because the hunger situation is worsening in some 13 different hotspots around the world. Some of them receive very little attention in the world media. I'll just list a couple of them. Maybe there are many more that you can think of off the top of your head, but Afghanistan, Sudan, South Sudan, Haiti, Mali, Yemen, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which you mentioned. I mean, the list seems to be growing, almost by the week, doesn't it?
Yeah, and these are overwhelming numbers, but we can't afford to be overwhelmed. And we have humanitarians, incredibly brave, principled people going out there every day, running masses of risks and massive risks in a context where, as you say, we are overstretched, we're underfunded, and we're literally under attack. Last year was the deadliest year on record to be a humanitarian worker. But even if I asked them to stop, they wouldn't stop. They are going to drive those trucks. They're going to bust through those checkpoints. They're going to pick up those grains of those sacks of wheat, and they're going to do everything to get them to the people who desperately need them. They're the real heroes of this effort on the front line of that humanitarian mission. And of course, we do it for the communities we serve, where for all these examples I've described of inhumanity, real inhumanity, in every single one of those places, there are amazing examples of humanity as well. And the real front line are these local communities who are bearing the brunt of the scale of these humanitarian crises, but are also going out every day and supporting their neighbors and their family members and their communities. And their courage is what inspires us to keep going.
Okay, clearly a few individuals around the world have the authority and the decision-making ability to put a stop to all of this. This is my last question to you. What is your message to those individuals? You don't have to name them. I'm sure most people know who they are. What's your message to them, given the situation that you face and that humanitarians like you face with dwindling funds?
I think my message to the most powerful individuals, the wealthiest individuals on the planet, is that we can do this. What a legacy this is. Put down everything else you're doing and think about saving 100 million lives in the coming year. And we have the plans, we have the networks, we know how to do it. We just need the funding. And all we're asking for is 1% of what you'll spend on defense. I suspect you'll spend more than that on defense this year, let's be honest. 1% of all of that, and we can do something extraordinary that will help you be remembered for your generosity to those in direst need. And is there anything more important than saving those 100 million lives? If there is, I haven't seen it.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. Tom Fletcher, UN Under-Secretary General for Human Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Tom.